Hey guys, Infidel1258 here. Today I was looking for some content within the Discord, just reviewing what you guys are looking at. I was looking at DAO discussions, I was looking at Mav chat, I was looking at Tavern, and something I found here that was interesting from Jeff here. He was proposing an idea within the DAO discussion for maybe a proposal, or at least he was floating an idea of around presenting a proposal toward a new deck of cards within Splinterlands. And he wants to think through how we could essentially create sinks for DAC because he feels that that might drive the economy. And so within today's video, I actually want to touch on Jeff's topping points here, this idea of a new deck of cards and a new way of operating cards. But more specifically, the video is actually going to be around in a moment like this within Splinterlands where SPS is now below 1 cent and where DAC is still off peg and where card values are, continuing to fall, etc. What actions do we need to take? What is it upon us to sort of drive economic conditions through some sort of creative solutions, or is there just a moment of we just need to be patient? And I don't think that that's what people want to hear. I think people want solutions. We want to be able to act and be proactive. I'm not convinced, however, that that is actually going to be the path. I don't think we have the control to manipulate markets in ways that we sometimes believe or desire would be possible. And so I actually think this is a wait and see moment. And yet, that doesn't mean we shouldn't come up with good ideas or talk about interesting new solutions. This is one of them. Let's talk about it. Let's see if there's other ones that maybe come around this conversation. And frankly, then we'll finish with that broader conversation of like what we can do in a moment where things are really stagnant. If that sounds interesting, stick around and stay tuned. My name is Dwayne Cunningham. I go by Infidel1258. You can just call me 12. Leave comments on my videos or this one in specific, and I will review those and maybe turn it into content. So Jeff here within the DAO discussion chat earlier today dropped this comment saying, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he came up with an idea that he thought would improve the economy. He wants to create a huge sink for DAC. He's talking about creating an entire new pack of 49 cards. Those 49 cards would be bought in a different way than any other set of cards has ever been sold. And the idea is that you would actually, and I'll say specifically, his proposal, I didn't check his math, but he's saying if all the cards were bought, it'd be 151,000 new cards, and because it's a limited set. Limited set. And so really small, really, when you compare that to other cards that already exist, that is a teeny tiny issuance. There are cards with millions and millions of copies. So this would be relatively small. And yet it could garner a significant amount of money. How would it do so? It's not like buying packs. That's the key here. He's talking about this idea that you would he uses the word burn, DEC, in order to acquire copies of the cards. But at the same time, I don't really think he means burn because he's talking about creating profit. And so burning would mean deletion of the DAC and no one gets it. And that would help our economy. And that's an interesting thought in and of itself, but he's not talking about truly burning it. He's talking about collecting those profits as revenues, maybe to the DAO. That seems to be what he seems to be thinking. Cause it's like, he says in here, we could generate $286,000 and the DAO could hire a team member with that money maybe to execute this approach. He's not sure if it would be technically possible because in this this is more like a card burning, like in the past where with Vruz, I think we burnt, didn't we? With Vruz, I think we burnt DAC. That was the first great burning, I think. And then you got X amount of copies if you were burning X amount. I might be misremembering that now. But this is more what he's talking about as opposed to 2,000 DEC to buy a pack. Packs may contain a card, etc. This is no, you're going to get the cards that you want. You want commons, spend the DEC. You want rares, you spend the DEC. Epics, spend the DEC. Legendaries specifically. So it's like, these are the price points and he's got 6 cents for a common, 30 cents for a rare, $1.1 for an epic, and $5 for a legendary. And that would be DEC value that you would pay to the game or to the DAO. And I think he's open to any of those possible solutions, like the team does it or we do it. But if we do it, it goes to the DAO. And then we would fund that project manager to make it happen. It's an interesting thought. And it gets me excited because I love this game and I love the card collection aspect. I'm a collector as well as a game, investor, and I like the idea of seeing more and more cards within the game. I know that has its downsides. I know that more cards means sort of a dilution of value, and people have said, for a long time, ever since the Chaos Legion kind of frenzy and the FOMO that sparked, the first wave of craziness for Splinterlands, we've heard a lot of people say that more cards mean dilution of price. It's in card inflation, and that's going to necessarily mean that old cards are never worth anything, period. That's some people's assertion. And I do believe some people actually think that harshly about it. Some people are more nuanced, and they'll say things like, you got to be careful about which cards have, similar abilities and synergies, because if you really replicate or replace an old one, you might erase some of its value. And I think that's probably a more balanced thought on the topic. But most people will agree that new packs are going to dilute the interest of existing cards. And I think that's at least a fair conversation. I don't know if I entirely agree, because it's going to be card by card. Like, you wouldn't say like a card that does this sort of magic with, this sort of nerfs and it would replace this sort of card. We got a melee secondary tank versus like a support caster, and you wouldn't say that one replaces the other. So if card design is creative and thoughtful in that sort of path, now these are both betas, but my point being, if a new card comes out and it doesn't directly replace, I think you can be okay. Having said that, there's only so much money in the ecosystem, at least unless we grow our player base. And so that does mean that issuing new card collections is a detractor from investment in other aspects. We're currently selling Rebellion. 4.7 million packs of Rebellion are still available. That's pretty good, I think. I think most of us thought like 3 million packs were going to sell, and 5 have sold. That's great. I think we're doing quite well with respect to moving product. Is it perfect? No. But if we see SPS pump in the next weeks or months, I think that'll be exciting to watch, because that'll spark new value in our pocketbooks, which might spark more pack movement, etc. It is definitely, we want to understand and acknowledge that dropping too much assets or things for sale on the community stretches our capacity to buy the things we desire. We can never have everything. And so when you keep giving us more and more things to pick from, if the community isn't growing, the value remains flatlined, roughly speaking. Maybe a little bit every month because people add in a couple, smaller purchases because they like the game and they want to. But generally speaking, let's say if $10 million is all we've got in the ecosystem and we issue 20 new products, it's not necessarily going to go, $100 million now is invested in the ecosystem, because really there's $10 million worth of value, and people often sell what they have to buy what they want. And so there's a movement of assets, not necessarily a new investment into assets. And so we got to be careful about that. And I think he understands that. And I think, there were some comments like to that effect toward Jeff saying this sync is just going to dilute more the card market. So essentially taking the problem from one place to another and not really solving the problem, which in my opinion is lack of investment in real players and player-based size in the ecosystem because of our underdevelopment and mistakes made and consequently lack of trust. So I'm not sure I entirely agree with Mushroom Seer, but at the same time, I think he's speaking a lot of wisdom about we've got to be careful about how much new assets and products we issue into the ecosystem. And I think more to the point is that broader conversation that I started the video talking about, which is, it would be amazing if DEC got back to peg. It would be amazing because when DEC is at peg, you start to see people burning SPS for DEC. They want DEC today, and we go, even if SPS is lower than I want, if it's at peg and burn value, and like I can just make a quick little switch for 20 or 50 bucks, to buy some cards or whatever that I want to do, or rent some cards or whatever I want to do. I think that actually happens. In fact, I know it happens because I've done it at price points for SPS that I don't necessarily feel are, ceilings. And so Holding DEC at peg is deeply important for the tokenomics of this and the flywheel and for the success of Splinterlands. And so I get the sentiment from the comment from Jeff saying, what about a new card selection that might drive DEC, burn? He said burn, but it might be locking up of DEC is another way to think about it if we actually are going to keep those. Or maybe we do burn it. Either way, if we can contrive scenarios and situations where DEC returns to peg, obviously that's good for the game. But my question, the broader question underlying this whole video is this. Can we actually contrive a scenario where DEC, where we control the free market? That's really what we're asking. Because we're saying, if I create this one great idea, then DEC will return to peg. If I create this one great idea, SPS will be more desirable and people will flock into the game. If I do this one modification within the game, suddenly there'll be this massive influx of new players. And I think it's so worth pursuing those things. I'm not expressing hopelessness. I'm just trying to speak to a bit more patience. Because sometimes, especially in this moment, with what as we talked about, the broader market being where it's at, I don't think we have any reason to be concerned that some of these altcoins, which haven't really gone, can't go. Which is to say, I do think they can go. Hive, SPS, DEC, XRP. I think a lot of tokens that you guys are maybe touching or curious about have space and room to run. And I think that will remain possible or plausible until such time that we see Bitcoin really flooring. And some of you think that's years away. Maybe some of you think that's weeks away. Whatever that timeline looks like, when we start seeing Bitcoin really falling into a crater and you start to see that established bear market chart, that's a different thing. Then maybe we start talking about how altcoins have missed their opportunity. But for the time being, as long as the chart's looking like this, I don't agree that we need to be rushing or panicking to make moves within the development of the game, or the tokenomics of the game, or the card issuance of the game, so that we are scrambling to manipulate the market. Free markets are far too complicated for one input to dramatically change the financial output. It doesn't mean we should stop trying. Absolutely can. There's proposals around liquidity pools, and there's, manipulation around leaderboard payouts, and there's, looking at the new game Soul Keep, and what are we going to do with the SPS rewards there, and what will that do for the SPS tokenization? There's so many complicated things we should and will continue to think through. But I think more than all of our inputs, we need to understand that market desire is a free market force. Supply versus demand is actually this deeply complicated thing where, there's a million inputs that are feeding into desire to buy, some demand. And there's actually many inputs that are inputting to supply. Like look at DEC. We can burn SPS to create DEC. So the supply is questionable depending upon the inputs that provoke burning of SPS. So I've talked about in the past, if SPS spikes in price, people might burn SPS to access DEC, to enter into liquidity pools. That's a separate conversation, but I just need to put that there because, man, even the inputs on supply are variable. And so my point is, these are deeply complicated systems. And I like you, I want moon mission today, not tomorrow, not next year. But here we are. And I think we've come this far. And so this is a conversation around, let's continue to be thoughtful about the ideas that we might propose. And maybe a card pack is a cool idea. And I wouldn't necessarily say no to that. But at the same time, I don't really think we have a silver bullet that's going to, turn everything all green, turn every candle green. I don't think that's realistic. And I think in the middle of this moment where Bitcoin is where it is, I think we have reason to believe in the plausibility of upward momentum just because of market forces. And if we scramble and claw to contrive a situation, we actually can hurry in the wrong direction. So let's make thoughtful choices and let's move cautiously and with patience. That's what I'm saying. What do you guys think? What do you think about issuing a whole new deck of cards right now? I think maybe not, especially with Rebellion sales currently being concurrent, right? But ultimately, we would love to see new reward cards relatively soon, and eventually a new pack. One of the thoughts within the Discord chat was, the implication that we shouldn't issue any new cards because that'll undermine the value of the old cards. And again, I don't necessarily agree to that. But secondly, don't we ultimately need new cards? Like, this is a collectible card game. Eventually, we need them, right? Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about all that. Appreciate your time and attention. Have an amazing day. God bless.